everybody for being here tonight. This is a good group. Glad that you came out. I just realized that probably the best way to advertise a class on social media is social media. So a lot of people shared the news about the class. I think June even posted it on the Leeds Facebook page. And I appreciate everybody doing that. That really helps generate some excitement, and so I'm glad that we started off. What I'd love is for this group to grow. Instead of, when the way quarters go, especially the winter quarter where the days get shorter and it gets colder, the groups get smaller and smaller and smaller. But I'd love to have one year where, we start with this and we get more and more and more. So we can do that by inviting friends and looking around and seeing who's not here. Don't get anybody from Tim's class, though. We don't want to do that, not officially, but we can invite people that maybe aren't here tonight to come and support this class. So tonight we're going to just set this up by talking about why a study in church on social media. And the answer to that question really quickly is that social media is changing our world. Now there are a lot of good things that are coming about. It makes life easier. It keeps us in contact with one another. A lot of you have grandkids and nephews and nieces that live in far off places, and you get to stay in touch with them and see how they grow, and all of that is great, and we interact in ways we never have before. There's all kinds of commerce going on online that's very helpful. You can buy groceries and just drive up to Walmart and they load your trunk up, and there are all these wonderful developments, but the world is changing. And we're not supposed to withdraw as Christians from the world and be hermits outside of society. We're supposed to know our society well enough to evangelize it. And so we've got to talk about this, because I think social media, more than any other thing in a while, is changing our society. And tonight is all about how that has happened. We're going to just talk about ways that life is changing for us. And so that's what I want to do. And I'm just going to run down a list. And I'm going to start with the generation of kids who've kind of been born with this social media. And the first challenge is to come up with a name for them. I've got iGen up here, and I'll tell you where that came from in a moment. But I think the most well-known name for this generation is Gen Z, Generation Z. I've heard that. I think we just get that from going... I think my generation is Gen X, and then you got Gen Y and Z. I don't know what we're going to do next. Maybe go to double A. I don't know if we start over at the alphabet, but Gen Z is one. Post-millennial is another name that I've heard applied to this group of people. That's kind of lazy because that's just after the millennials. I like screenagers. I heard that one. That's my favorite, but it won't work in a few years when all these kids grow up. And so one that was developed by a sociologist, coined by a sociologist named Jean Twenge, is iGen, lowercase I, but my font wouldn't let me do that. So iGen, like the iPhone or the iPad. And it doesn't matter what you call them, you just need to be aware that there is a group of people, young people right now, that are very different from probably everybody in this room. Now let's talk about some distinct qualities of them. They're born between 1995 and 2012. So maybe, Kayla, that gets you. You're kind of a silverback Gen Z. You're one of the older ones, right? What are you, about 23, something like that? 22. So you're on the old end of that. You're one of the older ones. Ask your dad how old you are. Yeah, you're definitely on the older end of that. So you were born in 95, something like that. And then the youngest of this group would be about 7 years old. So my kids are in this group. Look how many people in society are a part of this group, 25%. And there are a lot of other age groups to include here. So this is a large demographic of people. Members of this generation are smartphone natives. What do you think that means? It means they don't know a world without smartphones. When Kayla was born, sorry to keep picking on you, but you're really the only Generation Z person in here. when Kayla was born, smartphones had not been developed yet, but she probably doesn't remember very much about life without those. Most of her life, she's had that tool, and definitely as you get younger, these kids have just grown up with this technology. They definitely don't remember a world without the internet. I do, right? Most people in here remember world, how it went without the internet. We at least remember dial-up internet. That's something that kids laugh at. It's like a rotary phone to some of us, a dial-up internet service. So that makes them unique as well. 3 out of 4 American teens now own an iPhone, and I've heard numbers higher than that, up to 80%, which sounds more realistic to me than 3 out of 4. Look around and you'll see. And look at this. They spend 9 hours a day online. Now that sounds extreme, but that includes streaming music and television. They don't really watch cable TV or broadcast television. They stream everything. So if you count all the time they do listening to music and watching television, you lump that in there, that's 9 hours a day on average. Now, how much of that do we carve out for social media? About 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day engaging with friends on social media, or just scrolling mindlessly through a Facebook news feed or Instagram feed. 2 hours a day, that's a lot of time that they spend on social media. The average child gets, I should have hidden this to see if y'all could guess this age, but the age at which the average child now gets his or her first smartphone is 10. That sounds very young to me, and that's the average, meaning some of them get it much younger than that. That's a very big responsibility for a very young person, but this is the world we're coming into now. You see them walking around with them all the time, got them in their back pockets, or walking around with their heads in them or their ears in them, whatever the case may be. 1 in 4 of this group do not attend religious services. Now, knowing their age, a lot of this is the responsibility of their parents at this point, but we're seeing a secularization as we go from generation to generation in America now. Their parents, not as religious as their parents not as religious as their parents. This is the most secular generation America has seen. And I'm not saying that necessarily ties in to their being digital natives or smartphone natives, but it's an interesting correlation, as is some of this other stuff. They perceive one another through fractured bits. In other words, they are pretty good at putting together a picture of a person by just looking at a few pictures here, a few tweets over here. They feel like they can get to know you without ever coming face to face with you, which is an idea that a lot of us at our age and older and younger than me think is ludicrous. How can you get to know somebody without having any flesh and blood contact with them? But that generation sees it that way. I don't have to meet them. I can text with them. I can become very close to them through messages and things like that. They're also socially active. They have more social awareness because of the social media. And they're very concerned about social justice. You hear a lot about social justice warriors. But here's the thing. Before social media, to be concerned about activism and things like that, you had to show up at a protest. You had to physically be present somewhere. You had to volunteer somewhere. But this kind of activism that we're talking about here is at home, on your phone, or behind a computer screen. So I read somebody called them slacktivists, which I thought was my second favorite term tonight, next to screenagers, slacktivists, because while they are concerned, and nobody's questioning their sincerity, they're not getting out there in the world. And I'll later on share some of those stats with you. They're safer, they don't take as many risks, but they're never getting out of their rooms because they can take care of everything they feel on their smartphone or on their computer or iPad or whatever the case may be. So this is a generation of people like we've never seen before, and they're not fully responsible for that. There are things that we could do growing up that it's impossible for them to do now. When I got out of college, I graduated from college, I had about a month-long window that was a very unique period of time in my life. I didn't have any responsibilities at all. I didn't have any schoolwork. I just graduated. And I didn't have a job yet. I had one waiting on me, but I didn't have to show up for a month. And I thought, I'm not going to have an opportunity like this again. So I talked to a few friends who were in the same situation. And we decided we'd go out west and go camping. And I asked my dad if I could borrow his 1984 Dodge Ram van with blinds and carpet and a ladder on the back and a cup holder the shape of the state of Texas. It was great. And he said yes. And then I had another friend who had a pop-up camper. It was a Scamper, and it had a hole in the wheel well, which collected a lot of dust in the camper when you drove it over dirt roads. And we got those things together, and whatever camping equipment we had, which wasn't much, and we loaded up in the van, and we drove. We drove to South Dakota. We saw the Badlands. We saw Mount Rushmore. Went to Wyoming, saw Devil's Tower. We saw Bighorn Mountains, Yellowstone National Park, Grand Tetons. Went down to Colorado, saw Colorado National Park, Rocky Mountains. Even went down to Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak. We saw all of that in 2 weeks. We were mostly driving the whole time, but we saw all that stuff that we had never seen before. We didn't get online and look this stuff up. We didn't have Google Earth or anything like that. We saw pictures in a Rand McNally guidebook. We took out paper maps and found our way there. No cell phones, no navigational tools, no contact with the outside world. It's one of the few times in my life when I've been completely untethered from all responsibilities or anything that had been familiar to me. And that adventure, or quest, if you want to call it that, was really good for me because I got to, kind of discover myself and get some perspective on things back home at a pivotal time in my life as I was getting ready to start a youth ministry position. Now, that was a really big time in my life. But that's impossible. Nobody can do that anymore. Nobody will do it, but I wonder if anybody can do it. And don't get me wrong, navigational tools are great. I was just talking to somebody we're going to get together with on Saturday, and I started to say, can I get directions to your house? I said, well, we don't have to do that. I have your address, and I can just plug it into my phone. And that's great. I enjoy the convenience of that. But it also takes some adventure out of life. And kids don't understand that. They don't know what it's like not to be able to call home, not to be able to text and have somebody at their fingertips at every moment. They don't really know what it's like to be physically alone anymore. And there may be some good things about that, but there's also some challenges about that as well. So this is a very unique generation of people, if you would agree with me on that. And we could talk about it some more. We probably will talk about it some more. But let me get to some other changes in society and talk about information. We're talking about an interactive network, which means a lot of facts and non-facts, a lot of fiction is being shared across various platforms with great ease, which means it's going to change information. How long has it been since you've been to a library for reasons other than having your kids entertained when they're about to drive you crazy at the house? I mean, just to go look something up, you don't have to do that anymore. You have information. We call this the information age because information is at our fingertips and so easy to get to. But it has affected us in all kinds of ways. Yes, we can go online and go on Facebook and say, does anybody have a good lasagna recipe, and get it right away. We can ask for, I see this a lot, does anybody know a good plumber? And you can get an answer to the question really quickly. But we also get a lot of news off of social media. 62% of Americans get their news, their main source of news is social media. That's more than half. That's a lot of people. And most of them get the news without any critical thinking about it. Just accept it. It's online, so it must be true. I know that sounds crazy for me to say that, but that's how a lot of people are thinking these days. And it's changing the way things are done. Think about the way media has changed politics, okay? This is 1960, presidential election, Kennedy and Nixon. And you remember what happened, or you've heard about what happened. They were neck and neck, or maybe Nixon was a little bit ahead until this televised presidential debate. The first, if I'm not mistaken, the first televised presidential debate ever. And Kennedy was ready for it. I'm not talking about in terms of information and knowing his stuff. He did have that, but so did Nixon. But he was ready in terms of his appearance, and Nixon wasn't. This is not the most flattering still shot for Nixon, but it kind of shows you, and you've seen clips of this, right? Nixon looked like he had had a long day, looked like he needed a shave. He was sweating profusely. He looked uncomfortable. And Kennedy just looked really relaxed, ready to go, like he'd done television his whole life. And that was a turning point in that election. And maybe you remember that election, and maybe you voted in that election, and maybe you saw this on television, but the guy who was ready for television and knew how to use it, he's the one that won. And I'm not saying that's the only reason he won the election, but it was a big part of that. Well, fast forward into 2008, and do you remember Obama and how he was picking up steam? A lot of it had to do with his knowledge of how to use the internet in campaigning. He raised a lot of, if I remember correctly, it was in 2008, he was raising a lot of money through online donations. And I think I remember that the amazing thing was it was a lot of donations that weren't necessarily individual big donations, but he was able to do that online. And then in 2012, he started using his social media platforms more and more. We get into 2016, Trump and Clinton, and it gets really hairy. You know, there's some things going on that we're still trying to figure out. And a lot of it has to do with this software that has been called, that's been given the name bots, like as in robots. These software programs that hackers or developers make to behave like humans on social media. Maybe you've had a friend whose Facebook account has gotten hacked, and you thought you were friends, and you get friended by them again, and you accept the friend request, and you get a message from them. You say, oh, they want to chat. And you start talking with them, and they're talking really weird, and they're talking to you about some kind of insurance, and you're wondering, why is my friend talking to me, trying to sell me insurance? You're not talking to a human being. You're probably talking to one of these bots, just a software program that has learned is not the right word, has been programmed to talk something like a human being. Some of this was going on, we're not sure the extent of which, in the presidential election 2016. During one of the presidential debates, 400,000 accounts that were in political dialogue during the debates are suspected of being bots. 400,000 accounts on Twitter. That's a lot of accounts. And did it have an effect on the election or not? It's too complicated to tell. You know about the investigations into the Russians and what they were doing. We're still trying to figure out that. And I'm not trying to get political here. Everybody has opinions about this kind of thing. And I'm not being a conspiracy theorist. I'm just saying that this information highway that we have is now being sabotaged and abused. And the phrase fake news is something we really do need to think about, because there is a lot of fake news out there, and it's not being vetted by the sources anymore that you once trusted. If you go online and you see something, that doesn't mean it's true. You have to discern for yourself. And of course, we don't have the ability to know everything, so it's a very difficult world that we live in. We have to be more skeptical about things. That's another way the world has changed. We've become more cynical and more skeptical because of the way this free information is working. Now, another way that's being abused is because it's helping in a lot of ways. Oppressed people are able to get their message out in tyrannical governments. So what are those governments doing? They're shutting down social media platforms. I know you probably can't see all of this. This is just a demonstration of countries that have blocked certain social media platforms. This applies to Facebook, and you can probably recognize the shapes of some of these countries, and you're not surprised that they're on the list. But Iran has currently blocked Facebook, as has China and North Korea. Big surprise there, right? But also some other countries that have had problems with this: the United Kingdom, Germany, Syria, Egypt, not a surprise there, India, some that we think are more free in allowing information to be passed around have had problems with these because they want to control the information. Here's a chart on YouTube. You can see that China again, North Korea, of course. Actually, North Korea is not on that one. Yeah, they are. China, North Korea, Russia. They're having problems with it as well. A lot of Middle Eastern countries. Wikipedia doesn't have quite as hard a time. Maybe it should, but it doesn't. And then Twitter has caused a lot of problems. You can see Russia has had issues with Twitter, and Venezuela over in South America. In America, we really uphold values of free speech and try to let all the information out there. We've already talked about what can happen from being real free with that, but on the other hand, these places that have human rights violations and where there are oppressed people, they're holding it down. They're trying to clamp down on it because they don't want the information out. And this is another way the world has changed quite a bit. It's getting harder for them to do that. Let's talk about matters of faith, and I'm going to share with you some stuff that I got from a guy named Andrew Conrad. These are just some interesting statistics here that show you again how people of faith are changing because of social media. More than 70% of nonprofit communicators consider social media as one of the most important communication channels. The only one above social media, and I realize this chart's not easy to see either, but above social media is 71% of the most important communication channels. The one above it is the website, 80%, so that's online as well. Down at the bottom of the list are media relations, PR, and print media. That's still 39%, 32% is still being used, but nowhere close to the levels of social media and online, like websites and things like that. That's how nonprofits are getting in touch, which would include churches. Here's a question that was asked of Protestant pastors: which, if any of the following, does your church actively use? And over 80%, almost 85%, say that they use their church Facebook page. Well, that would include us, right? And pretty much every other church that we know about. I mean, it's free, it's easily accessed, it's a design that people understand. There's all these great tools like we're using even tonight, the live feed where people can watch online. So why wouldn't you use it? It's very important too. Here's another stat. 54% of Christian millennials, so that'd be the generation above iGen, the one we were talking about. Millennials also use a lot of social media. They watch online videos about faith or spirituality. That just means churches need to get on YouTube, they need to get on Facebook, they need to get their videos out there because more than half of young people are, learning about spirituality online through videos. Another statistic says 62% of churches use social networking to connect with people outside of their congregation, compared to 73% who network within the congregation. So that just shows you that churches are trying to connect with people in their congregation, outside their congregation, using social media. And again, why not? Because it's free and it's easy to access and people know how to use the tool. So why wouldn't they do it? Now this is the one that really gets me. 65% of Americans prefer an in-person preacher to a video sermon. And I know all of y'all are sitting there thinking, well, that's good, that's more than half. More than half want an in-person preacher. But I'm looking at that and saying 35% of people don't care. It's not that they prefer, I looked into this, it's not that they prefer to watch from home to an in-person, but they're saying either way, it's the same thing. In-person or over Facebook Live, it doesn't matter. That's a big chunk of people. 35% of professing Christians. And so it might explain why a lot of churches everywhere are struggling with their attendance. A lot of people, I can say personally, just anecdotally, that there have been folks that I haven't seen in a while, and I'll call them up and I'll say, we've been missing you. Are there any problems? And talk with them a little bit. And at some point in the conversation, they'll always say, well, I've been keeping in touch with you guys online. I've been watching lessons online, which is great. Maybe some of you are watching tonight. I'm glad you're watching. But I don't want us to get the idea that you can get everything through social media that we once got in person. Because God has called us together. I talked a little bit about this Sunday when we were talking about the Lord's Day. God has called us as a church to come together and meet together, and there's a good reason for that. Think about it, and this, I've been doing a lot of talking. Maybe you could share and help me out with some of these ideas. What can we get when we're here together that we can't get in the virtual world when we're sitting and watching on our phone?
I think the aspect of worship from singing.
Singing's a great example, right? There are a lot, and I should say here, we have a lot of folks that can't drive at night. I don't want them on the road, risking their lives to come out here on a night like this, so dark. A lot of folks can't physically even leave their home, and this is a wonderful opportunity for them. There's a lot of folks that live a long distance away and they can't be here, and all of that is understandable. But if you can be here, here are some of the things you miss out on. Singing is one. You can sing along, but I think a lot of our shut-ins would say, boy, I wish I could get there and be with my brothers and sisters and be in the middle of that singing. It's just not the same, singing along in a virtual world. I think another thing is just the awkwardness of relationships. And I use that word awkward because that's what it is, right? That's what causes us to text somebody instead of call them up on the phone, or to just kind of sit at home instead of going out there and being in a place where people say, dumb things to each other and hurt each other, and then we have to forgive each other and ask for forgiveness. It's just a lot easier sometimes to stay home. Yet Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Even as I've loved you. And he loved people who were crucifying him. So in order to practice that, we've got to rub shoulders with one another and get into these uncomfortable situations. And I think another thing that maybe sometimes, and I sound like I'm judging. I'm not judging. I'm just trying to read this and figure this thing out. But I think another thing that causes us to withdraw sometimes is opinions. And when you get in a group of people, you start getting as many opinions as there are armpits, and they all stink, and you get in that situation. And you get reminded, though, that it's not all about me, that I have to work with people because this isn't my kingdom, this is God's kingdom. Which, if you think about it, that's actually a really good thing. And so I think God calls us together for a lot of reasons. Yeah, Mark?
Does this include Church of the Highlands model, where they have satellites that they're watching video?
Oh, that's a good question. And if you maybe didn't hear Mark, he was asking if this includes a multi-campus model where, you have one church with a live preacher and the others are watching via closed caption or something. I don't know. That would definitely skew the numbers on this because the largest churches in the country use that multi-campus method.
I'm wondering if it's because of that, the reason that's growing, that this 35% prefers to watch the video.
Right, and that's a very different thing than watching it through social media, so that's a good question. It makes me feel a little bit better, so thank you for asking the question.
I think it inhibits personal growth too. Like you're supposed to, you work in the church, and you also, in a sense, work and worship.
Right. Yeah.
You miss out on that work and then the benefits of work and all of that.
The service. You've got to have people here to have a class, to teach a class, to worship, and then to see opportunities like our care group meetings on Sunday evenings. So there's a lot of things. Matthew.
I was going to say, one thing, that's what you miss if you're not here.
Yeah.
One thing would be shepherding, especially because of we're in such a flux of the way that people think and work. Today's elders, these millennials and these I generation, what we call them, when they become elders one day, they will be proficient probably at communicating with people through social media. And maybe this shifts a little bit, but for certain, today's elders didn't grow up with iPhones and social media. They shepherd person to person, face to face, phone calls. If you're somehow expecting to have this connection to where they can actually shepherd you by your digital presence, that's unreasonable.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but there is a huge generation gap here, maybe bigger than we've ever experienced before. And so I've got so many things to go to. Let's move on. Privacy. One disturbing development is people are losing the ability to distinguish between what should be private and what should be public. You've seen this before. You know what I'm talking about. People airing out their problems. That should be personal. They're doing it online. They're sharing pictures and things that we really aren't interested in seeing. And a lot of it is not understanding that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., that's all in the public sphere. And I think one day the kind of stuff we're having to the he said, she said stuff that's been in the news so much lately, that's going to be a thing in the past, because everything's going to be archived for people to give photographic evidence of in the future. And I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know, and I don't want to weigh in on that. I'm just noticing the world has really changed on that. And I've talked to the kids a little bit last quarter when we were talking about these things, and the classes with them have been very different than what we're doing tonight. But this is one thing I told them, that, you know, some things should be secret. Keep your secrets and save some things for only the people who are closest to you. Because when you share something with somebody, that's your way of trusting them. But when you do that and you air that out on social media, you're trusting complete strangers and you're treating them like they're close friends. And that's when things get really, really mixed up. What else? Relationships are changing. Think about how different we look at relationships. These days, you can friend somebody you've never met before. You can friend somebody in India when you're in the United States. You can unfriend somebody without any major consequences. You just click a button and they probably don't even notice that you unfriended them. You stay connected 24 hours a day and wake up in the middle of the night and you're upset about something and you want to get some attention or you want to get the message out or something. There's somebody online up at that time of the day somewhere in the world that you can contact. That's different and that's new. And still we feel, even though we're connected all the time, we feel devastatingly alone. This woman, Sherry Turkle, who I think is a sociologist, she coined this phrase, and it's the title of one of her books, Alone Together. Alone Together. That, friends, is the family at the dinner table or at the restaurant that's sitting there, the family of four that you've seen, that I have seen, who's sitting there, and they each have their devices and they're not talking to each other, and they're just looking at their own individual universe that they are a part of, and they don't engage. That's being alone together, and that's becoming more and more common. More and more people are preferring the company of their phone to real people, face-to-face contact. How many times have you gone to the trouble of being with somebody in the same space as them, and then they get a phone call or they get just a text or notification, and their finger goes up in your face? Just a minute. And then they get into their phone. That's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it. If it's an emergency or something, okay, you got to take the phone call. But if it's just I love it when they take the text and they start laughing at the inside joke that you're not a part of while you just stand there and wait on them to get done with their phone. When we're doing this, we're prioritizing phones over people, and our relationships are really changing. One last thing here is empathy. The selfie, to me, is a perfect symbol of our loss of empathy. Empathy is the ability to sense what another person is feeling. We're so self-obsessed nowadays, we each think we're some kind of a celebrity because we can get our stuff up online and we can do it equally so, that we're forgetting that there are other people. And when we're communicating through the medium of a screen, we forget that there's a real person with feelings on the other side of that. So how do we navigate this world? The answer to that question very quickly is return to God's Word. Because God's Word is described as a lamp and a light. The psalmist says that, as do others, and it can enlighten even this age. It's been relevant for more than 2,000 years. It will continue to lead us, and that's where we're going to turn throughout these studies. So remember, our goal is to grow, so that means bringing somebody next week, and I hope that you'll stick with it, and we'll keep studying this together. Thanks for the first night.